First question for you is, does the amount of protein in your diet actually affect your risk for diabetes? What does the evidence-based research actually say?
Difficult to answer. Look, part of the writing Proteinaholic was to kind of stop people from even talking about protein. In other words, it's hard to look at a food and break it down into its separate nutrients and then assess those nutrients themselves. So for instance, with heart disease, for many years, we argued it was about saturated fat, but back when they were arguing about it many years ago, there were some guys that said, wait, it's about the protein actually that's causing the disease. And nowadays you get that debate with heart disease, and we get it with diabetes too. And that's because, there's a whole interrelatedness. It's amazing how complex the human body is. And we're never just eating protein. Like, I hate it when I go to a restaurant and I order a salad and they say, would you like protein with your salad? Because I'm always like, what do you mean by do I want protein with my salad? And they're like, well, do you want a piece of meat? Well, I'm like, well, meat's more fat than it is protein. So you asking if I want fat with my salad? And so this gets me, this whole idea that we have to look at food by whether it's protein or whether it's fat. Now, we could have an academic conversation about that, which we're about to. But in general, I think it's the combination of the two. Now, there have been very, very good epidemiologic studies that have shown that higher animal protein consumption leads to a higher risk of diabetes. And you can say it is because of the protein, but then you can also say that it's likely that people that are eating higher animal protein are also eating higher saturated fat. And we know that a big problem with diabetes is intracellular fat. We do know that higher plant protein intake does not equate with diabetes. So is it the protein or is it the fat? And that's a hard thing to answer. Now, we do know there are certain amino acids that are in higher quantities in animal proteins. And in fact, those amino acids may in fact have a negative effect. We know, for instance, that alanine may be part of the driving force that drives saturated fat into the cell. So we know that eating too much saturated fat causes intracellular fat, which interferes with the transcription of insulin receptors, which causes insulin resistance. But what's causing the fat to get into the cell in the first place, that may be amino acid driven. And it may be amino acid driven because the amino acid stimulates insulin, or it may be the amino acid itself. We don't have that exactly figured out yet, but there's many thoughts to that. It may be that in the animal protein itself, there's a higher amount of animal protein that has sulfur-containing amino acids like methionine, and these create a more acidic blood effect, and therefore you have to get an alkaline effect to combat it, and there's inflammation involved in that. It may be that it's inflammation to begin with. It may not have anything to do with the amino acid or the saturated fat. It may have to do with the endotoxin that's found in the animal meat. That then creates an inflammatory response when we eat it. So there's so many factors, it's hard for me to answer that. I could tell you for fact that animal protein is correlated with diabetes. I could tell you going on a vegan diet is correlated with a drop in A1C. But I could also tell you that higher, like increasing your plant protein consumption isn't related. So it's hard for me to definitively say it's the protein.
Okay, I think that's a phenomenal response. And, I like to say the same thing as you, which is like, let's not talk about fat and protein and carbohydrate. Let's talk about, protein-rich foods or saturated fat-rich foods. So I could start by asking the question, does the quantity of protein-rich foods influence your risk for diabetes? And I think you did a fantastic job answering that.